Metta World Peace get off easy? For the answer to that and more things relating to Ron Artest, we're going Thunder Cover with Darnell Mayberry. Thunder Cover is sponsored by Byford Buick GMC. Nobody treats you better than Byford. Darnell, did Ron Artest get what he deserved in 7-game suspension by David Stern?
I think so. I think the punishment fit the crime. It was a malicious elbow, and 7 games is a lot. 6 of those are playoff games. You have to take that into account that playoff games are very significant games. These aren't regular season games he's missing. And the fact that James Harden was hurt, I think the NBA really considered that and really came down with a pretty fair punishment for Ron Artest. 7 games, the precedent for elbows. Really, no one's been suspended as long as Ron Artest has for throwing an elbow, and I think that's fair.
Let me put on my outrage hat for just a second, Darnell. And there's plenty of outrage out there. It's among Thunder fans. Bill Platsky, writing for the Los Angeles Times, said, I thought the guy'd be gone for the playoffs. The suspension is nothing compared to what he should have gotten. Isn't there something there to their argument? Yes, it's one playoff series, but can you imagine the idea that the Thunder would play the Lakers in a second round series and that Ron Artest would be available, but James Harden might not be?
Yeah, that's sort of one of the things that you have to take into account. The retaliation factor that's there, it's probably a high probability that something else could happen in the second round if these two teams both advance and meet in the second round, which they're on par for. So, it's definitely something the NBA's got to be careful with. They've got to monitor closely. I think the Thunder's going to be smart, though. They know that they can't really retaliate having this much scrutiny with this whole situation, because if they do, suspensions are going to be a lot heavier and more significant than 7 games.
Let me ask you this, though. What you're saying, though, is 7 games is sufficient because it basically wipes out one playoff series for Ron Artest, but not the possibility of a second one, which might likely be the Thunder.
Yeah, a whole playoff series, that's significant. It impacts Ron Artest, it impacts the Lakers and his teammates, so I think that's a severe punishment in the grand scheme of things, not for maybe Metta World Peace, Ron Artest, because his history in this league, he's been suspended 13 times, a bunch of fines throughout his career. I just think that the history of his actions, that's the only thing that you can say, okay, he got off light because he's been here before. We know that there's precedent with him, and I think that that's the only way you can say that he got off easy.
It sounds like you do believe that James Harden's condition is being taken into consideration.
Yeah, no doubt about it. When you look at the NBA bylaws, they say that flagrant 2 fouls, a part of determining the fine and or suspension is the player's condition. They saw James Harden was laid out on the court, and I think they did research for 2 days with the Thunder, with the Lakers, with all parties involved, team doctors, to see what James Harden's condition is. And I think the fact that he's only suspended 7 games, Metta World Peace, I think that's a good sign. It tells you that James Harden is probably going to be back for the playoffs. I think they know that his condition's going to be okay, and he didn't suffer a significant injury.
Ron Artest, Metta World Peace, he'd lose $348,000 if he serves the suspension entirely in these playoffs. He continues to apologize. Darnell, he skipped a scheduled appearance on Conan O'Brien's show last night because he says right now nothing's funny, but this is his 10th suspension in 10 years. His 4th since that 86-game suspension in 2004. And here's my question. Is any of that being taken into consideration? The NBA did not reach him with an 86-game suspension for the malice in the palace. The worst player-on-customer conflict in the history of professional sports. It didn't get across to him. He's still out there. Is this guy a menace to society and sports?
I don't know about a menace to society. He really hasn't done anything off the court. He's sort of been a model citizen off the court, which is surprising. It's all on the court that he's found problems and trouble in the NBA. But I don't think the NBA really considered his history. I think they've sort of looked at how he's turned over a new leaf. He's won a citizenship award. And I think, they really looked at that and said, okay, this guy is trying to turn over his actions, his life, in terms of his role in the NBA. But there's no way you can consider or say that the NBA considered or took into account Artest's past history in determining this suspension. I think a lot of people have a problem with that, probably rightfully so, but you got to give a guy a second chance. I think any talk of a lifetime ban is just absurd.
Lastly, Darnell, Kendrick Perkins seemed to change his tune. Talked to him on Sunday, Kendrick Perkins said, he's a good dude, nobody would try to hurt somebody. That's not what Kendrick Perkins said yesterday.
Yeah, he's like the rest of us. He saw the replay a jillion times, and he saw how malicious that elbow was, and the fact that Ron Artest, as you said, cocked it back and followed through. It was a vicious hit, and it clearly was intentional. So I think Kendrick Perkins saw that, and he said it's uncalled for. There's no place in the game for that, and he has no sympathy for a guy who would intentionally do something like that that could seriously hurt a player like James Harden, or any player for that matter.
Thanks, Darnell. That's all for this edition of Thunder Cover, sponsored by Byford Buick GMC. Nobody treats you better than Byford.